Welcome to Poirot Stories. I'm Preston Flint. Tonight we return to the little gray cells of Monsieur Hercule Poirot in an original tale I've crafted for you. Blood on the Marble Balcony. Pour yourself a cocoa, dim the lamps, and let us step back into the elegant, treacherous world of 1927 England. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. London? New York? A train carriage in the Alps? I rid everyone. Chapter 1. The House on the Cliff. The house was called White Gables, though no gable had ever been white. It stood on the very lip of the Dorset Cliffs, 30 miles west of Bournemouth, where the chalk drops sheer into the English Channel like a snapped bone. Built in 1894 by Sir Reginald Haverford, shipping magnate, collector of Ming porcelain, and, whispered in certain Bournemouth clubs, occasional smuggler of more than porcelain, the mansion had been shuttered since the old man's death in 1924. 3 years of salt wind had scoured the stucco to the color of old teeth. Ivy, stubborn as gossip, clawed at the balustrades. Yet on the evening of Friday, 17th of June 1927, the great oak doors swung open for the first time since the funeral. Miss Diana Haverford, Sir Reginald's only surviving child, had decided to reopen White Gables, and as we shall see, to invite death inside with her. Diana was 28, tall, flame-haired, and already a fixture in the society pages for 2 reasons. First, she had refused every eligible proposal since her debut in 1919. Second, she had refused to sell White Gables, though the estate's debts could have purchased half of Mayfair. Tonight she wore an emerald silk gown cut on the bias, the color of deep Atlantic water, and a single strand of pearls that had once belonged to a Russian Grand Duchess. Her eyes, storm gray, flecked with green, swept the entrance hall as the first motor car crunched on the gravel outside. She lifted a cigarette in a jade holder, inhaled, and said to the butler, "Grimshaw, let the circus begin." Grimshaw, 55, ramrod spine, face like a gravestone, bowed. "Very good, miss." He had served the Haverfords for 32 years. He had buried Sir Reginald. He had watched Diana grow from a barefoot child, stealing strawberries from the kitchen garden, to this poised, dangerous woman. He did not approve of weekend parties. He approved even less of the telegram that had arrived at 3:17 p.m., addressed to a Belgian detective. The first guests arrived at 6 o'clock in a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom. Captain Marcus Trevelyan stepped out first, broad-shouldered, sun-bleached hair, the kind of man who looked as though he had been carved from teak and left to season in the tropics. He wore white flannels and a navy blazer with the crest of the Royal Navy Yacht Squadron. A dueling scar, pale against his tan, ran from left ear to jaw. He laughed too loudly as he handed his valet a pigskin suitcase. "Damned fine view, Diana. Your father always said the house was built on the edge of the world. Looks like he was right." Diana's smile did not reach her eyes. "Careful, Marcus. Some edges crumble." Next came Mrs. Lavinia Blackwood, Diana's aunt by marriage, widow of Sir Reginald's younger brother. 53, draped in black lace, though her husband had died in the influenza of 1918. She carried an ebony cane, though she did not limp. Her eyes were the pale blue of skimmed milk, and they missed nothing. "Diana, darling," she said, kissing the air an inch from each cheek, "you simply must let me catalogue the Ming before the vultures descend." The vultures, Poirot would later reflect, were already circling. Dr. Felix Underwood arrived on foot, having left his Austin 7 in the stables. 41, soft-spoken, spectacles perpetually sliding down a thin, academic nose. He had been the Haverford family physician since qualifying at Bart's in 1911. He carried a small brown paper parcel tied with string. "For your headache, Diana," he murmured. She had not mentioned a headache. He flushed crimson. Poirot, watching from the library window, made a mental note. "The doctor is in love. Love is a motive." Miss Sylvia Pettigrew, Diana's former governess, now paid companion, had been in residence for a week, supervising the army of charwomen who had scrubbed 3 years of salt and silence from the floors. 35, prim, hair pinned so tightly it seemed to pull her eyebrows into a permanent expression of mild surprise. She wore sensible brown lace-ups and carried a clipboard. "Everything is in order, Miss Diana. The blue suite for Mrs. Blackwood, the Chinese room for Captain Trevelyan, the—" Diana cut her off with a wave. "Thank you, Pettigrew. You may go." Pettigrew's lips thinned. She had nowhere to go. White Gables was her world, and Diana, rumor said, intended to sell it. Mr. Roland de Vere arrived at 6:42 in a taxi from Bournemouth Station. London art dealer, sleek as patent leather, hair brilliantine to a mirror sheen. He carried a Morocco leather case containing a loupe, a catalogue, and a contract already initialed by Sotheby's. He kissed Diana's hand with theatrical gallantry. "My dear, the Ming collection is the talk of Bond Street. Shall we say 60,000? Diana laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "We shall say dinner first, Roland, business after pudding." Last came Miss Chloe Haverford, Diana's cousin, 19, flapper fringe, voiced like a cracked bell. She arrived in a buttercup yellow Bugatti driven by a young man who was not invited to stay. Chloe wore a backless silver lame dress that ended just below the knee and a rope of pearls that had definitely not belonged to any Grand Duchess. She hugged Diana with theatrical enthusiasm. "'Cause you look divine, and the house, gosh, it's simply haunted, isn't it?" Diana detached herself gently. "Only by the living, Chloe." At 6:42 precisely, Poirot was a creature of precision. A cream-colored Daimler purred up the drive. The chauffeur, George, opened the rear door with the solemnity of a priest. Hercule Poirot stepped out. He was, as always, impeccable. Dove-gray suit, spats the color of fresh cream, Homburg hat tilted at exactly 11 degrees. His mustache, magnificent, symmetrical, waxed to perfection, twitched once as he surveyed the house. He disliked the sea. He disliked cliffs. He disliked telegrams that offered no explanation. Yet the telegram in his waistcoat pocket had been unequivocal. "Urgent. Family matter. Come at once. D.H." Diana met him on the steps. "Monsieur Poirot, you came." "Mademoiselle, when Hercule Poirot is summoned, he obeys, provided the summons is sufficiently mysterious." She laughed, but her hand trembled as she took his arm. Inside, the entrance hall soared 2 stories to a stained glass dome depicting Neptune in a chariot drawn by seahorses. A chandelier that had once hung in a Venetian palazzo glittered above a chessboard floor of black and white marble. Portraits of Haverford ancestors, admirals, merchants, one bishop, stared down with uniform disapproval. Poirot's eyes catalogued everything: the faint scent of beeswax and salt, the grandfather clock that gained exactly 3 minutes every 24 hours, the butler's shoes, polished, but the left sole worn thin at the outer edge. Grimshaw favors his right leg. Curious. Cocktails were served in the long gallery, a room 70 feet long, lined with Ming porcelain on teak stands and oil paintings of clipper ships under full sail. A gramophone played "Yes, We Have No Bananas" at low volume. The guests assembled like pieces on a chessboard. Poirot accepted a sirop de cassis from Grimshaw, who presented it with the air of a man offering poison. He sipped, nodded approval, and began to observe. Captain Trevelyan stood by the fireplace, 1 foot on the fender, recounting a story of torpedoing a U-boat off Gibraltar. His laugh boomed. His glass was already empty. Debts, Poirot noted, gambling, the will. Mrs. Blackwood examined a blue and white dragon vase with a lorgnette. "Reginald promised me this one," she murmured to no one in particular. "Greed. Entitlement." Dr. Underwood hovered at Diana's elbow, offering aspirin, a shawl, a glass of water. devotion, obsession. Miss Pettigrew stood by the door, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Fear, dependency. Mr. DeVere circled the porcelain like a shark, murmuring figures under his breath. Commission, 15%. Miss Chloe danced a few steps of the Charleston with an invisible partner, pearls swinging. Youth, inheritance. Diana herself stood at the French windows that opened onto the marble balcony. Beyond the glass, the sea stretched to the horizon, molten copper in the setting sun. She turned to Poirot. "You see that balcony? My great-grandfather had it built so he could watch his ships come in. 80 feet above the rocks. No railings at first. He said only cowards needed railings. They added the balustrade after his mistress fell." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Fell, mademoiselle? Or was pushed?" Diana smiled without humor. "History does not record, but the marble still bears the stain, they say, on nights when the moon is full. Tonight the moon was 1 day short of full. Dinner was announced at 8. The dining room was paneled in oak, darkened by centuries of pipe smoke. A table that could seat 24 was set for 9. Silver epergnes overflowed with roses cut that morning from the walled garden. The first course, consommé Olga, was served by 2 footmen in powder blue livery. Poirot, seated at Diana's right, noted the placement. Trevelyan opposite, where he could watch her. Mrs. Blackwood at the foot, where she could watch everyone. Dr. Underwood to Diana's left, where he could refill her glass before it was empty. Conversation flowed like the wine. Trevelyan proposed a toast to old friends and new beginnings. Mrs. Blackwood countered with a toast to family treasures that should never be sold. DeVere raised his glass to the Ming dynasty and the commissions of the present one. Chloe giggled and drank champagne from the finger bowl. After the fish course, sole diapose, Diana laid down her fork. "If you'll excuse me, I need air. The balcony calls." She rose, the emerald silk shimmering like fish scales. The French doors opened onto the marble balcony that jutted 20 feet over the cliff edge. White gables crowning architectural folly. Beneath it, the sea gnawed patiently at chalk. Above it, a balustrade of Carrara marble, cool and gleaming under the rising moon. Diana stepped outside. The doors closed behind her with a soft click. Grimshaw, clearing the plates, heard the key turn in the lock. Click. No one thought anything of it. Not yet. Slow fade of cutlery clinking. Wind rises, a single gull cries. And there, my friends, we must pause. Chapter 1 ends with the stage set, the players in place, and the key turned in the lock. What happens next on that moonlit balcony will tax even the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot. If you're enjoying the story so far, do like, subscribe, and tap the bell. Chapter 2 arrives next Friday at 8 p.m. sharp. Until then, keep your alibis tight and your cocoa hot. This is Preston Flint, signing off from Poirot Stories. Good night. Chapter 2. The Crime Discovered. The table was a battlefield of crystal and candlelight. 9 settings, though 1 chair, Diana's, stood empty. The French doors to the marble balcony glowed faintly from the moon beyond. 2 pale rectangles in the dark oak paneling. Conversation had thinned to a polite murmur. Captain Trevelyan was halfway through a second bottle of Chateau d'Yquem 1919, his voice growing louder with every glass. Mrs. Blackwood dabbed her lips with a napkin the color of old bone and stared at the vacant chair as though it had personally offended her. Dr. Underwood kept glancing at the doors, then at his pocket watch, then at the doors again. Miss Chloe Haverford was attempting to balance a salt cellar on the rim of her champagne coupe. Mr. DeVere murmured figures into a leather-bound notebook. Miss Pettigrew sat rigid, hands folded, eyes fixed on the grandfather clock in the corner. The clock, Poirot had noted earlier, gained 3 minutes every day. At this moment it read 10:36, which meant true time was 10:33. Grimshaw entered with the entree, poulard à la Derby, truffled, flanked by asparagus in hollandaise. He moved with the silent efficiency of a man who had served royalty and smugglers with equal impassivity. As he circled the table, he passed within 2 feet of the French doors. He heard nothing from the balcony. No voice, no footstep, no cry. Only the low moan of wind and the eternal percussion of waves 80 feet below. At 10:38 precisely, Poirot timed it later with a stopwatch, Grimshaw heard the balcony doors close from the outside. A soft thud, then the unmistakable metallic scrape of the key turning in the lock. Scurrick. He paused, silver salver balanced on his palm. Through the glass he glimpsed a flash of emerald silk, Diana's gown, then nothing. The key remained in the lock on the balcony side. Grimshaw continued serving. He had heard Miss Diana lock herself out for air before. She disliked interruptions. At 10:41, Miss Pettigrew rose to fetch Diana's migraine tablets from the still room. She passed the French doors on her way to the baize door that led to the servants' corridor. Through the glass, she saw Diana clearly. Standing at the balustrade back to the house, one hand on the marble rail, the other holding her cigarette holder. Moonlight silvered her hair. She lifted the holder in a small salute. Pettigrew hesitated, then continued. "She is alive," she would later tell Poirot. "I saw her breathe." At 10:45, the gramophone in the long gallery wound down with a dying groan. Chloe Haverford squealed, "Someone wind the blessed thing." Captain Trevelyan lumbered to his feet, swaying slightly. "Allow me, little cousin. Nothing like a bit of ragtime to keep the blood moving." He disappeared into the gallery. The music resumed. "Ain't we got fun?" Tinny, cheerful, obscene in retrospect. At 10:51, Dr. Underwood's pocket watch, Poirot would examine it later. Stopped dead. The crystal starred in a perfect spiderweb from a single sharp blow. Underwood himself did not notice. He was staring at the French doors, lips moving soundlessly. "Diana, come inside. The wind is cold." At 10:53, Mrs. Blackwood announced she required her digestive in the drawing room. She swept out, cane tapping like a metronome. De Vere followed, notebook clutched to his chest. Pettigrew returned with the tablets and a glass of barley water, set them beside Diana's empty place, and sat again. The clock read 10:56, true time 10:53, at 11 Simon. Grimshaw cleared the entree plates. Still no Diana. Underwood rose. "I'll fetch her. She forgets the time when she's—" He stopped. When she's what? Poirot wondered later. Underwood never finished the sentence. He crossed to the French doors, turned the handle. "Locked." He rattled it gently. "Diana?" No answer. He cupped his hands to the glass. The balcony lay empty under the moon, empty except for a dark, motionless shape in the center of the marble floor. At 11:02, Underwood's voice cracked the air like a whip. "Grimshaw! The key!" Grimshaw was already moving. He produced a heavy ring of keys from his tailcoat, tried 3 before the 4th turned. The doors swung inward. A gust of salt wind rushed in, snuffing 2 candles. Underwood stepped onto the balcony. Poirot, who had been observing from the doorway to the servery passage, followed 2 paces behind. The scene froze them both. Diana Haverford lay on her back, arms flung wide as though embracing the night sky. The emerald gown had soaked up blood until it looked black in the moonlight. A single wound, just left of the sternum, precise as a tailor's dart, had pierced her heart. The weapon, a slender Italian stiletto, part of a display in the long gallery, now buried to the hilt. The blade's mother-of-pearl handle glinted like a cruel smile. Her eyes were open, reflecting the moon. Her cigarette holder lay 3 feet away, still smoldering. The emerald necklace, 4,000 pounds of Colombian stones, was gone. Underwood dropped to his knees. Diana! He touched her cheek, then her throat. His fingers came away scarlet. He looked up at Poirot, face bleached. She's warm. Not 5 minutes. Poirot knelt, careful not to disturb the scene. He noted no drag marks in the dew on the marble, no footprints except Diana's evening slippers, size 5, Louis heel, and one other set, larger, deeper, ridged rubber sole, leading from the French doors to the body and back. The balcony key still in the lock, on the inside of the door, though the door had been locked from the balcony side. A faint circular scratch on the marble near the lock, no more than 3 millimeters long. A smear of red lipstick on the balustrade, bright, almost garish. Diana had worn coral that evening. This was crimson. Rouge baiser, Poirot would later identify, discontinued in 1925. At 11:07, Captain Trevelyan staggered in from the long gallery, cigarette dangling. Good God! He dropped the cigarette. It hissed in a puddle of blood. Within seconds, the room filled. Chloe screaming, Mrs. Blackwood clutching her cane like a weapon, De Vere white as parchment. Pettigrew frozen in the doorway, clutching the migraine tablets. Grimshaw alone retained composure. He closed the French doors, locked them again with the key from the inside, and pocketed it. "Police," he said calmly. "I'll telephone." Poirot raised a hand. "Non, mon ami. First we preserve." He instructed Grimshaw to station a footman outside the doors. No one was to touch the balcony until daylight. He himself remained on the threshold, eyes cataloguing every detail under the moon's cold gaze. At 11:12, Chloe fainted. Dr. Underwood caught her automatically, then laid her on a chaise longue in the dining room. Mrs. Blackwood announced she felt faint and required brandy. De Vere poured it with shaking hands. Trevelyan lit another cigarette, inhaled, exhaled smoke like a dragon. Pettigrew stood apart, staring at the blood as though it were ink and she could read the future in it. At 11:18, Grimshaw returned. "Bournemouth police will send a man by motor launch. Tides against them. 2 hours at least." Poirot nodded. "Bon. 2 hours is a lifetime to a murderer." He turned to the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, no one leaves this room until I have spoken to each of you. Captain Hastings would say I am being theatrical. I say I am being thorough." He began with the timeline, speaking softly, forcing them to lean in. 10:38. Grimshaw hears doors close and key turn. 10:41. Pettigrew sees Diana alive on balcony. 10:51. Dr. Underwood's watch stops. He now noticed the crack for the first time. 11:02. Underwood discovers body. 13 minutes. 13 minutes in which a woman was stabbed, a necklace vanished, footprints appeared and vanished, and a door locked itself from the wrong side. At 11:25, Poirot examined the stiletto, wiped clean of prints. The display in the long gallery held 6 such daggers. This was the third from the left. At 11:27, he noted the balcony drain, a narrow brass grill at the edge. Something glinted in the moonlight. He knelt, produced a silver toothpick from his waistcoat, and fished out a single strand of blonde hair. Long, dyed, root darkness showing. Mrs. Blackwood was blonde, but her hair was bobbed to the jaw. This strand was 12 inches. At 11:30, the gramophone in the long gallery wound down again. No one moved to rewind it. The silence was sudden, shocking. Only the wind and the sea. At 11:35, Poirot addressed the room. "Observe the impossibility. The door was locked from the balcony side, key on the inside, yet Captain Trevelyan will tell you." He nodded to the captain, who had just re-entered, face gray. "The handle turned freely from the hall when you stepped out for your cigarette." Trevelyan blinked. Yes, I needed air. Thought I'd join Diana. Handle turned, doors opened. Then I saw..." His voice cracked. Poirot continued. So the door was unlocked from the hall side at 11:07, yet locked from the balcony side at 10:38. The key never left the balcony side of the lock, and beneath us, 80 feet of chalk cliff to the rocks. No ladder, no rope, no wings. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Therefore, mesdames et messieurs, we have a locked room murder of the purest kind. And Hercule Poirot does not believe in miracles, only in murderers who are very, very clever. At 11:40, Dr. Underwood found his voice. Her watch, he whispered. Poirot followed his gaze. Diana's wristwatch, platinum Cartier, had stopped at 10:51. The crystal was cracked in a star pattern. Poirot removed it gently. The hands were frozen. But the crack was on the inside of the crystal, impossible unless the watch had been struck after the glass was already in place. At 11:45, the first police launch was sighted, a mile out, running lights winking. Poirot stood on the balcony, coat collar turned up against the wind. He looked down at the rocks below, black and wet. He looked up at the house, every window dark except the dining room. He looked at the balustrade where the lipstick smear glowed like a wound. And he murmured to the night, "Someone in this house believes they have committed the perfect crime. But perfection, mon cher assassin, is the enemy of the possible." Wind rises. A single church bell tolls once in the village below. And there we must leave chapter 2, my friends. The body cooling on the marble. The key on the wrong side of the door. 6 suspects, 13 minutes, and one impossible truth. If the tension is keeping you awake, good. That is the point. Chapter 3 arrives next Friday. Until then, lock your doors, check your alibis, and tell me in the comments. Who do you suspect and why? This is Preston Flint signing off from Poirot Stories. Chapter 3, Investigation begins. Or good evening. Wherever you are, the sun has risen over White Gables and the night's horrors are laid bare in merciless light. If you've just joined us, pause now. Chapters 1 and 2 are waiting. For the rest of you, pull the blanket a little closer. It is Saturday, 18th of June, 1927, 6:03 a.m. The marble balcony is cordoned with kitchen twine. A single constable stands guard, stamping numb feet. And Hercule Poirot, having taken only 3 hours' sleep in the Chinese room, has begun the most delicate dissection of his career. Soft clink of teacup on saucer. Let us walk with him. Poirot descended the grand staircase at 5:57 a.m., immaculate in a charcoal suit and dove-gray spats. George, his valet, followed with a leather folio and a thermos of tisane. In the entrance hall, Inspector Japp was already waiting, sent up from Bournemouth by motor launch at first light. Japp was a blunt instrument, walrus mustache, bowler hat, boots that left crescents of mud on the marble chessboard. Morning, Poirot. Another of your blessed locked rooms? Précisément, mon ami. And this one, I think, will require the little gray cells at their most gymnastic. Japp snorted. Gymnastic. Right, body's still out there, photographer's on his way. Doctor, too. Poirot raised a hand. No. First, we establish the stage before the actors disturb the props. He led Japp to the dining room. The French doors stood open. Dawn wind fluttered the heavy brocade curtains. The balcony beyond was a study in grays, marble veined like Carrara clouds, blood now the color of rust, Diana's body covered by a white dust sheet that billowed gently like a sail. Constable Harris saluted. No one's touched anything, sir. Not even the gulls. Poirot nodded approval. He knelt, lifted the sheet's corner. Rigor had begun in the jaw and neck, lividity fixed on the back and hips. Death between 10:45 and 11:00 p.m., consistent with the stopped watch. He replaced the sheet with reverence. At 6:15, the police surgeon arrived. Dr. Murchison, brisk, ginger-beard, smelling of carbolic. He confirmed single thrust upward angle severed the aorta. Death within 90 seconds, no defensive wounds. Victim taken completely by surprise. Poirot murmured, "She knew her killer, trusted enough to turn her back." At 6:30, the photographer set up his tripod. Flash powder popped like gunfire. Poirot used the moments to measure. Balcony, 20 to x 12 distance from French doors to body. 9 to 4 in, footprints, Diana's slippers, heel marks 2 mm deep in dew. Second set, size 10, ridged rubber sole, 4 mm deep, leading from doors to body, then back to doors. No exit beyond the balustrade. Lipstick smear on balustrade, 3 inches long, transferred by pressure, not drag. Circular scratch near lock, 3 mm, concentric, as though made by a rotating metal ring. At 6:45, Poirot summoned Grimshaw. The butler stood in the doorway, apron pristine despite the hour. "Tell me again, monsieur, the key." Grimshaw recited without hesitation. 10:38 p.m., Miss Diana stepped onto the balcony, doors closed. Key turned from the balcony side. I heard it clearly. Brass on brass. I continued serving. Poirot produced the key from an evidence envelope. Heavy brass bow shaped like a clover leaf. "This key?" "Yes, sir." Poirot inserted it into the lock from the hall side. It turned smoothly. He removed it, reinserted from the balcony side. Again, smooth. "Identical mechanism," Jap grunted. Yet the key was on the balcony side when the captain entered at 11:07. Poirot twirled his mustache. Therefore, either the laws of physics suspended themselves, or the key was moved after the murder. At 7 breakfast was served in the morning room. Kippers, eggs, toast, silence. The 6 suspects sat like statues. Poirot entered with Jap, notebook in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, we begin. One at a time. The library, s'il vous plaît." Trevelyan smelled of brandy and salt. His hand shook as he lit a Turkish cigarette. Needed a smoke. Diana often took the air alone, didn't think anything of it. Handle turned, stepped out, saw. He swallowed. Thought at first she'd fainted, then the blood. "Poirot, you were in the long gallery winding the gramophone at 10:45? "Yes?" Chloe asked. "Alone?" "Completely." Poirot noted, Trevelyan's boots, size 10, rubber soles, were drying in the scullery, soles caked with seawater. "Midnight. Swim," he claimed. At 1 a.m., in evening dress, Mrs. Blackwood entered swathed in black lace, cane tapping. She sat without invitation. I was reading the Times in the drawing room. Page 7, shipping news. Reginald's old fleet. Poirot, you heard nothing? Nothing but the wind and that infernal gramophone. Poirot noted her copy of the Times lay folded to page 7, but the creases were fresh, paper still crisp. Unread until this morning? Underwood's spectacles fogged as he entered. He carried the brown paper parcel from the previous evening. Headache powder for Diana, aspirin and caffeine. She suffered terribly. Poirot unwrapped the parcel. Empty boots packet, receipt timed 6:12 p.m. Underwood. I was in the still room mixing a fresh dose when I looked through the dining room and saw her chair empty. Poirot. You noticed her watch stopped? Underwood flushed. Yes, I checked the time constantly. She was late. Poirot noted the still room door had a clear view of the French doors. Underwood could see the balcony without leaving his station. Pettigrew entered clutching her clipboard like a hymnal. I was cataloging linens in the still room. Miss Diana dismissed me at 6:30. I had no reason to return. Poirot. Yet you passed the French doors at 10:41? Yes, I saw her wave. She was alive. Poirot noted Pettigrew's shoes, brown lace-ups, size 6, left faint scuffs near the still room door. One scuff overlaid with a fingerprint in flour. Fresh. De Vere entered smelling of pomade and fear. I was examining a cracked Ming bowl in the long gallery, under a green banker's lamp. The crack runs from rim to foot, hairline. Poirot. Alone? Entirely. The bowl is worth 800 damage, 3,000 perfect. Poirot noted. The bowl in question was pristine. The crack was a reflection in the glaze. Lie. Chloe entered in a peach silk dressing gown, eyes red-rimmed. I was in the music room practicing the Charleston, alone. The gramophone has a new needle, sapphire brand. Poirot. You lost a pearl earring yesterday? Yes, on the cliff path, devil to find in the grass. Poirot produced the earring from the geranium pot. Chloe gasped. That's it! How? Poirot noted the music room gramophone was still warm. A record, Yes, We Have No Bananas, lay on the turntable, needle at the end. But the music room was directly above the balcony. At 8:30, Poirot gathered the household staff in the servants' hall. Grimshaw, 2 footmen, cook, 4 maids, all accounted for below stairs from 10:30 onward, except Grimshaw himself, who served until 11 sk. No one entered the dining room or balcony. The cliff face was sheer, no access from beach or garden. At 8:45, Poirot and Japp examined the long gallery display. 6 stilettos in a glass case, third from left missing, case locked, key on Grimshaw's ring. No fingerprints on the glass, wiped clean. At 9, Monsieur Poirot climbed to the music room, a small paneled chamber with a Bechstein baby grand and a Brunswick gramophone. The window directly above the balcony was open 6 inches. A silk curtain tie-back, emerald green, hung loose. Poirot measured from sill to balcony below, 28 feet. He looked down. The body's outline was still visible beneath the sheet. He noted a faint scorch mark on the windowsill, black, powdery. Burned rope, silk. At 9:15, the post-mortem van arrived. Diana's body was removed on a stretcher. The marble was hosed. Blood swirled pink into the drain. Poirot watched the water disappear. He knelt, shone a pocket torch into the grill. The blonde hair was gone, washed away, but caught on a screw head. A single fishhook, size 8, barbed. He pocketed it. At 9:30, Poirot stood alone on the balcony. He reconstructed. Diana locks herself out at 10:38. Seen alive at 10:41, stabbed between 10:41 and 10:51, necklace removed, footprints made, door locked from within, key on balcony side, killer exits. How? He looked up at the music room window, then at the chimney to its left, wide, Regency, soot blackened. He looked down at the drain, then at the circular scratch. He smiled, a small cat-like smile. Order and method, he murmured. The pieces are all here. Now, to arrange them. Church bell tolls 7. And there we pause, dear listener. Chapter 3 ends with the investigation in full flood. 6 suspects, 6 alibis, 1 impossible door. Next week, the clues will multiply and the noose will tighten. If you're theorizing in the comments, I'm reading every word. Who lies? Who bleeds? Who burns? This is Preston Flint signing off from Poirot Stories. Good night, or good morning, depending on your cliff. Chapter 4, Clues and Red Herrings. Or good evening, wherever you are, the sun has risen over White Gables and the night's horrors are laid bare in merciless light. If you've just joined us, pause now. Chapters 1 and 2 are waiting. For the rest of you, pull the blanket a little closer. It is Saturday, 18th of June, 1927, 6:03 a.m. The marble balcony is cordoned with kitchen twine. A single constable stands guard, stamping numb feet. And Hercule Poirot, having taken only 3 hours' sleep in the Chinese room, has begun the most delicate dissection of his career. Soft clink of teacup on saucer. Let us walk with him. Poirot descended the grand staircase at 5:57 a.m., immaculate in a charcoal suit and dove-gray spats. George, his valet, followed with a leather folio and a thermos of tisane. In the entrance hall, Inspector Japp was already waiting. sent up from Bournemouth by motor launch at first light. Jap was a blunt instrument, walrus mustache, bowler hat, boots that left crescents of mud on the marble chessboard. Morning, Poirot. Another of your blessed locked rooms? Précisément, mon ami, and this one I think will require the little gray cells at their most gymnastic. Jap snorted. Gymnastic. Right. Body's still out there. Photographer's on his way. Doctor, too. Poirot raised a hand. No. First, we establish the stage before the actors disturb the props. He led Jap to the dining room. The French doors stood open. Dawn wind fluttered the heavy brocade curtains. The balcony beyond was a study in grays, marble veined like Carrara clouds, blood now the color of rust. Diana's body covered by a white dust sheet that billowed gently like a sail. Constable Harris saluted. No one's touched anything, sir. Not even the gulls. Poirot nodded approval. He knelt, lifted the sheet's corner. Rigor had begun in the jaw and neck. Lividity fixed on the back and hips. Death between 10:45 and 11 p.m., consistent with the stopped watch. He replaced the sheet with reverence. At 6:15, the police surgeon arrived. Dr. Murchison, brisk, gingerbeard, smelling of carbolic. He confirmed, single thrust, upward angle, severed the aorta. Death within 90 seconds, no defensive wounds, victim taken completely by surprise. Poirot murmured, she knew her killer, trusted enough to turn her back. At 6:30, the photographer set up his tripod. Flash powder popped like gunfire. Poirot used the moments to measure. Balcony, 20 FTX 12 FT, distance from French doors to body, 9 FT 4 in, footprints, Diana's slippers, heel marks 2 mm deep in dew. Second set, size 10, ridged rubber sole, 4 mm deep, leading from doors to body, then back to doors. No exit beyond the balustrade. Lipstick smear on balustrade. 3 inches long, transferred by pressure, not drag. Circular scratch near lock, 3 mm concentric, as though made by a rotating metal ring. At 6:45, Poirot summoned Grimshaw. The butler stood in the doorway, apron pristine despite the hour. Tell me again, monsieur, the key. Grimshaw recited without hesitation. 10:38 p.m., Miss Diana stepped onto the balcony. Doors closed. Key turned from the balcony side. I heard it clearly, brass on brass. I continued serving. Poirot produced the key from an evidence envelope. Heavy brass, bow shaped like a clover leaf. This key? Yes, sir. Poirot inserted it into the lock from the hall side. It turned smoothly. He removed it, reinserted from the balcony side. Again, smooth. Identical mechanism, Jap grunted. Yet the key was on the balcony side when the captain entered at 11:07. Poirot twirled his mustache. Therefore, either the laws of physics suspended themselves, or the key was moved after the murder. At 7 on, breakfast was served in the morning room. Kippers, eggs, toast, silence. The 6 suspects sat like statues. Poirot entered with Jap, notebook in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, we begin one at a time. The library, s'il vous plaît. Trevelyan smelled of brandy and salt. His hands shook as he lit a Turkish cigarette. Needed a smoke. Diana often took the air alone, didn't think anything of it. Handle turned, stepped out, saw. He swallowed. Thought at first she'd fainted. Then the blood. Poirot. You were in the long gallery winding the gramophone at 10:45? Yes, Chloe asked. Alone? Completely, Poirot noted. Trevelyan's boots, size 10, rubber soles, were drying in the scullery, soles caked with seawater. Midnight swim, he claimed. At 1 a.m. In evening dress? Mrs. Blackwood entered swathed in black lace, cane tapping. She sat without invitation. I was reading the Times in the drawing room. Page 7, shipping news. Reginald's old fleet. Poirot. You heard nothing? Nothing but the wind and that infernal gramophone. Poirot noted. Her copy of the Times lay folded to page 7, but the creases were fresh, paper still crisp. Unread until this morning. Underwood's spectacles fogged as he entered. He carried the brown paper parcel from the previous evening. Headache powder for Diana, aspirin and caffeine. She suffered terribly. Poirot unwrapped the parcel. Empty Boots packet, receipt timed 6:12 p.m. Underwood. I was in the still room mixing a fresh dose when I looked through the dining room and saw her chair empty. Poirot. You noticed her watch stopped? Underwood flushed. Yes, I checked the time constantly. She was late. Poirot noted. The still room door had a clear view of the French doors. Underwood could see the balcony without leaving his station. Pettigrew entered clutching her clipboard like a hymnal. I was cataloging linens in the still room. Miss Diana dismissed me at 6:30. I had no reason to return. Poirot. Yet you passed the French doors at 10:41? Yes, I saw her wave. She was alive. Poirot noted Pettigrew's shoes, brown lace-ups, size 6, left faint scuffs near the still room door. One scuff overlaid with a fingerprint in flour. Fresh. De Vere entered smelling of pomade and fear. I was examining a cracked Ming bowl in the long gallery under a green banker's lamp. The crack runs from rim to foot, hairline. Poirot. Alone? Entirely. The bowl is worth 800, damage 3,000, perfect. Poirot noted. The bowl in question was pristine. The crack was a reflection in the glaze. Lie. Chloe entered in a peach silk dressing gown, eyes red-rimmed. I was in the music room practicing the Charleston alone. The gramophone has a new needle, sapphire brand. Poirot. You lost a pearl earring yesterday. Yes, on the cliff path. Devil to find in the grass. Poirot produced the earring from the geranium pot. Chloe gasped. That's it. How? Poirot noted. The music room gramophone was still warm. A record, Yes, We Have No Bananas, lay on the turntable, needle at the end, but the music room was directly above the balcony. At 8:30, Poirot gathered the household staff in the servants' hall. Grimshaw, 2 footmen, cook, 4 maids, all accounted for below stairs from 10:30 onward, except Grimshaw himself, who served until 11 Saudersauer. No one entered the dining room or balcony. The cliff face was sheer, no access from beach or garden. At 8:45, Poirot and Japp examined the long gallery display. 6 stilettos in a glass case, third from left missing. Case locked, key on Grimshaw's ring. No fingerprints on the glass, wiped clean. At 9:00, Poirot climbed to the music room, a small paneled chamber with a Bechstein baby grand and a Brunswick gramophone. The window directly above the balcony was open 6 inches. A silk curtain tie-back, emerald green, hung loose. Poirot measured from sill to balcony below 28 feet. He looked down. The body's outline was still visible beneath the sheet. He noted a faint scorch mark on the windowsill, black, powdery. Burned rope. Silk. At 9:15, the post-mortem van arrived. Diana's body was removed on a stretcher. The marble was hosed, blood swirled pink into the drain. Poirot watched the water disappear. He knelt, shone a pocket torch into the grill. The blonde hair was gone, washed away, but caught on a screw head, a single fishhook size 8, barbed. He pocketed it. At 9:30, Poirot stood alone on the balcony. He reconstructed. Diana locks herself out at 10:38. Seen alive at 10:41, stabbed between 10:41 and 10:51, necklace removed, footprints made, door locked from within, key on balcony side. Killer exits. How? He looked up at the music room window, then at the chimney to its left, wide, Regency, soot blackened. He looked down at the drain, then at the circular scratch. He smiled, a small cat-like smile. Order and method, he murmured. The pieces are all here. Now, to arrange them. Church bell tolls 7. And there we pause, dear listener. Chapter 3 ends with the investigation in full flood. 6 suspects, 6 alibis, 1 impossible door. Next week, the clues will multiply and the noose will tighten. If you're theorizing in the comments, I'm reading every word. Who lies, who bleeds, who burns? This is Preston Flint signing off from Poirot Stories. Good night, or good morning, depending on your cliff. Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. Poirot had retired to the library at 10:15 p.m. with a tray of cocoa and his leather folio. Jap dozed in an armchair, boots on the fender. The 6 suspects had been confined to the upper floors, bedrooms locked from without, constable in the corridor. Grimshaw patrolled the ground floor with a storm lantern. At 10:58, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. At 11's exactly, Grimshaw's lantern passed the cellar door at the rear of the servants' passage. The door was ajar. He had closed it at 10:30. He descended. The cellar was a cavern of shadows and oak racks, bottles ranked like soldiers, dust thick as felt. A single bulb glowed above the burgundy. Grimshaw's beam swept the aisle and stopped. Hanging from the central beam, swaying gently in the draft from the coal chute, was Grimshaw's own reflection. No. It was Grimshaw himself. No. Impossible. The figure wore the butler's tailcoat, starched shirt, black tie. But the face above the noose was purple, tongue protruding, eyes bulging like marbles. A wooden stool lay kicked toward the wall. On the dusty floor beneath the body, a perfect bowline knot, the rope's end still warm, and pinned to the lapel with a silver typin, a scrap of paper. Grimshaw, the real Grimshaw, dropped the lantern. Glass shattered, paraffin hissed across the stones. He staggered back, fetched Constable Harris from the kitchen. By 11:07, the house was roused. Poirot arrived in puce silk dressing gown and Morocco slippers, eyes blazing. He knelt by the stool, touched the knot. Bowline, sailor's knot. Grimshaw was Merchant Navy, 1898 to 1904. He examined the angle. Rope over beam, drop of 4 feet. Neck broken instantly, but the stool kicked toward the wall, not away. A man kicking in extremis thrusts away from support. Poirot stood. Murder. The butler did not hang himself. Someone wished us to believe he did. At 11:15, Jap cut the body down. In the dead man's pocket, the balcony key, not the one from the French doors, but a duplicate filed shorter. Poirot held it to the light. Observe, the shank is worn, used recently many times. He turned to the living Grimshaw. No, the second Grimshaw. The man was trembling, face the color of tallow. I went to the pantry for the master key at 10:45. Left the real Grimshaw, Mr. Hargreaves, polishing silver in the butler's pantry. When I returned at 10:55, he was gone. I thought he'd retired. Poirot's eyes narrowed. 2 butlers? None. 1 butler and 1 imposter. He sniffed the corpse's collar. Chloroform, faint but unmistakable. The real Grimshaw, Hargreaves, had been drugged, dressed in duplicate livery, hanged. The false Grimshaw had been among them all evening. At 11:25, Poirot ordered every room searched for the imposter. The house was in uproar. Lightning illuminated corridors like magnesium flares. In the music room, Chloe Haverford was found crouched behind the Bechstein, sobbing. She clutched a wax cylinder, not the Charleston record, but a custom shellac disc. Poirot took it gently. On the label, in Diana's handwriting, Garden Party 12 May, laughter. He carried it to the gramophone, set the needle. Diana's voice, bright, alive, filled the room. Darlings, the roses are divine this year. Sylvia, do stop fussing. Laughter, a toast, then spliced seamlessly. I'll be on the balcony at 10:30. Don't wait up. The voice was Diana's, but the sentence was new. Poirot lifted the needle. A forgery. Recorded, cut, re-recorded. Played on a timer? But this gramophone has no timer. He examined the mechanism. Beneath the turntable, a clockwork kitchen timer, gears jammed with a sixpence. Set for 10:45. The imposter had planned every echo. At 11:40, the search reached the attic. A cedar trunk, Miss Pettigrew's, stood open. Inside, a blonde wig, long curled root darkness showing, a tube of rouge baiser lipstick, a pair of size 10 rubber-soled boots still damp, a coil of fishing line phosphorescent green, and a birth certificate. Poirot unfolded it carefully. Illegitimate, half-sister to Diana. Poirot's breath misted the paper. Mon Dieu. The governess was family, and family, mes amis, is the sharpest knife. At 11:50, the storm reached its peak. Rain lashed the windows like buckshot. Poirot gathered the suspects in the long gallery, now stripped of its ming, porcelain packed in straw for the yard. Lightning strobed through the tall windows. He placed 6 objects on the baize card table. The stiletto, cleaned of blood. The rouge baiser tube, the pearl earring from the geranium pot, the blonde wig, the stopped wristwatch, the duplicate balcony key. He began, voice cutting through thunder. Twist the first. The butler. Mr. Hargreaves was drugged in the pantry, dressed in duplicate livery, hanged to silence him. He had seen the murderer rehearse, perhaps with the boots, perhaps with the fishing line. Blackmail is a dangerous game. He lifted the wig. Twist the second. The governess. Miss Pettigrew, half-sister, unacknowledged, terrified of dismissal. Diana planned to sell White Gables, travel, leave Sylvia penniless. But blood calls to blood. Sylvia used her own birth certificate as a bookmark in her Bible, hidden in plain sight. He held the wax cylinder. Twist the third. The voice from the grave. Recorded snippets from a garden party spliced with a new sentence. Played at 10:45 to suggest Diana was alive after 10:41. The timer jammed deliberately, evidence of tampering. He lifted the fishing line. Twist the fourth. The impossible footprints. Captain Trevelyan's boots, borrowed while he swam at midnight, filled with stones lowered on this line from the music room window. Dragged across the dew to create prints, then retrieved. The phosphorescent coating explains the ghostly glow Miss Chloe claims to have seen from her bedroom. The fishhook caught in the balustrade crack. The scorch on the sill, line burned through with a cigarette. He turned the duplicate key. Twist the fifth. The locked door. The real balcony key was lowered on the fishing line, threaded through a curtain ring, turned in the lock from outside, then pulled up. The ring left the circular scratch. The duplicate, filed shorter, was left in the lock to confuse. He faced Miss Sylvia Pettigrew. She stood by the fireplace, clipboard forgotten on the floor. Her face was a mask until lightning revealed tears. "You planned for weeks," Poirot said softly. The wig to plant the blonde hair, the lipstick to implicate Chloe, the earring dropped deliberately, the necklace snapped, planted on Mrs. Blackwood, every red herring perfect. But perfection, mademoiselle, betrays itself. The bowline knot, your knot, learned from your father's sailing manuals. The chloroform, stolen from Dr. Underwood's bag. The birth certificate, your motive, your rage. Pettigrew's voice was a whisper. She was going to throw me out. After 35 years, I was family. She laughed, high, broken. I made the footprints with his boots. I lowered the key. I stabbed her when she turned to the sea. She never saw me. She trusted me. Thunder drowned her sobs. At 11:59, Japp stepped forward with handcuffs. Pettigrew did not resist. As she passed Poirot, she whispered, "The marble stain, great-grandfather's mistress. History repeats." Poirot inclined his head. "History, mademoiselle, is written by the living, and the living must answer." At midnight, the storm began to ease. Rain softened to a hiss. Japp led Pettigrew to the waiting launch. The remaining guests stood in silence. Poirot returned to the balcony. The marble was clean now, but in the moonlight he could still see the faint pink shadow. He placed a single white rose where Diana had fallen. "Order and method," he murmured, "but always, always the human heart." Thunder rolls away. Rain fades to drizzle. A single gull cries. And there we must leave Chapter 5, dear listener. The complications have twisted like the fishing line. The truth's reeled in. Next week, the revelation and justice. If your pulse is racing, comment below. Did you suspect the governess? What clue betrayed her? This is Preston Flint signing off from Poirot Stories. Good night. Lock your doors. Chapter 6. The Revelation. Poirot began with the door. He walked to the French windows, opened them with the real balcony key, still warm from Jap's pocket. Moonlight spilled across the marble like milk. The pink shadow of blood had faded to a ghost. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard a confession, but confession is not comprehension. You deserve to understand how the perfect crime was woven and how it unraveled. He closed the doors, locked them from the inside, removed the key, and placed it on the table. Observe. At 10:38, Miss Diana locks herself on the balcony, key on the balcony side. At 11:07, Captain Trevelyan enters from the hall. Handle turns freely. Key still on the balcony side. Impossible? Merely ingenious. He produced the duplicate key, shorter shank, filed edges. This was left in the lock after the murder to confuse. The real key was never inside the lock at all after 10:38. It was outside, on the fishing line. He lifted the coil of phosphorescent line, let it shimmer like a snake. From the music room window, 28 feet above, a curtain ring threaded onto the line. The real key hung from the ring by its clover leaf bow. Lowered, inserted from the outside, turned. The ring scraped the marble, 3 millimeters concentric. The scratch you all dismissed as old wear. He demonstrated with a spare key and a brass curtain ring from the library. Click, scrape. The lock turned. The line was then pulled up, the key retrieved. The duplicate, already prepared, inserted from the hall side later to be found on the balcony side, a delay of seconds only. He moved to the footprints. Size 10, rubber soled. Captain Trevelyan's sea boots, borrowed while he swam at midnight. His evening shoes left drying in the scullery. The boots were filled with pebbles from the beach, weighted to 12 stone. Lowered on the same fishing line, dragged across the dew to the body and back. The line passed through a second ring. This one burned away with a cigarette, leaving the scorch on the music room sill. The phosphorescent coating explains Miss Chloe's ghostly glow from her bedroom window at 10:47. She thought she saw a spirit. She saw a rehearsal. He lifted the fishhook, size 8, barbed. Caught in the balustrade crack when the line snagged. The hook was meant to be retrieved with the boots. A tiny oversight. He turned to the lipstick smear. Rouge Baiser, discontinued 1925. Miss Chloe's compact stolen from her handbag at dinner. Applied to the balustrade with a gloved finger. Transferred, not worn. A false clue to implicate youth frivolity, the flapper cousin. The blonde hair. From the wig in Miss Pettigrew's trunk, plucked with tweezers, dropped into the drain. The wig itself, dyed straw, roots showing, worn by the murderer to plant the strand. Mrs. Blackwood's short bob could never produce a 12-inch lock. The necklace. Clasp snapped deliberately. Hidden in Mrs. Blackwood's jewel case to suggest greed, inheritance, the aunt. Another blind. The wristwatch. Stopped at 10:51 because the murderer struck it against the balustrade after death. The star crack is on the inside of the crystal, impossible in a fall. The impact broke the balance staff. Post-mortem staging. The wax cylinder. Recorded 12 of May at a garden party. Diana's laughter, her toast, her voice, snippets spliced with a new sentence. I'll be on the balcony at 10:30. played at 10:45 on the gramophone with a kitchen timer jammed by a sixpence. The timer was to run for 3 minutes, long enough for Miss Pettigrew to establish she was in the still room. But the sixpence slipped. The mechanism jammed at 10:47. The record played on, needle stuck in the run-out groove. Another tiny flaw. The bowline knot. Miss Pettigrew learned it from her father's sailing manuals, Sir Reginald's library, third shelf. The real Grimshaw, Mr. Hargreaves, was drugged with chloroform from Dr. Underwood's bag, dressed in duplicate livery, hanged. He had seen the rehearsal with the boots on Friday afternoon. He demanded $500 to remain silent. Silence was cheaper. Poirot turned to the birth certificate. Sylvia Diana Pettigrew, born 1899. Father Reginald Haverford. Mother Eliza Pettigrew, governess. Diana's half-sister, unacknowledged, unpaid, unloved. When Diana announced the sale of White Gables on 10th of June, Sylvia's world ended. She would be dismissed with a $50 gratuity. 35 years of service erased. Blood called to blood, and blood answered. He faced Pettigrew. You entered the balcony at 10:39 before Diana locked the door. You hid behind the balustrade in the shadow of the geranium pot. Diana turned to the sea, trusting. You stabbed once, upward, precise. She fell without a cry. You removed the necklace, snapped the clasp. You dragged the weighted boots across the dew. You lowered the key on the line, locked the door from outside. You burned the line, retrieved the boots, returned them to the scullery. You planted the wig, the lipstick, the earring. You recorded the cylinder weeks earlier. You rehearsed every step. But you forgot the human heart. Grimshaw saw, and the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot saw you. Pettigrew's voice was a thread. I was in the still room at 10:41. You said I waved. Poirot smiled gently. No, mademoiselle, Miss Chloe saw the wave from her bedroom window. She saw Diana's silhouette against the moon. But the silhouette wore the wig. You waved with Diana's cigarette holder, stolen earlier. The coral lipstick was yours, wiped off after the deed. The rouge baiser was for the balustrade only. He lifted the final object. The pearl earring. Dropped deliberately into the geranium pot at 10:42. Miss Chloe lost the pair on the cliff path Thursday. You found one, kept it. The other is still in the grass. A perfect pair, until one is planted. Silence fell, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock, now reading 12:18. True time, 12:15. Pettigrew sank to her knees. She was going to throw me into the workhouse. I was family. Poirot's voice was soft as velvet, sharp as the stiletto. Family, mademoiselle, is not a claim. It is a responsibility. You chose murder. Japp stepped forward. Sylvia Pettigrew, I arrest you for the murders of Diana Haverford and Albert Hargreaves. The words faded under thunder's last rumble. At 12:25, Poirot stood alone on the balcony. The moon was setting, a copper coin in ink. He placed the white rose where Diana had fallen. The marble was cold. He spoke to the night. You arranged your revenge even in death, mademoiselle. The will, rewritten 10th of June, leaves White Gables to the National Trust, the Ming to veterans. Miss Chloe educated on condition she never wear red lipstick. You knew your sister's heart, and you broke it. He turned to the house. The lights were going out one by one. Order and method, he murmured. But always, always, the human heart betrays. Clock strikes 1/4. Wind dies, waves hush, and there we must leave Chapter 6, dear listener. The revelation is complete. The impossible crime. Explained. Next week, justice served, and a final word from the cliff's edge. If you solved it before Poirot, timestamp your comment. If the governess fooled you, confess below. This is Preston Flint, signing off from Poirot Stories. Chapter 7. Justice served. The tempest has passed. It is Sunday, 19th of June, 1927, 8 a.m. 16 hours since the confession, 16 hours since the marble balcony was scrubbed clean. White Gables stands open to the sun for the first time in 3 years. Windows gleam. Ivy stirs in a gentle breeze. And Hercule Poirot, having taken only 2 hours' sleep on a chaise in the library, prepares to close the book on a house that has swallowed 2 lives in a single night. Soft clink of coffee cup, rustle of newspaper let us walk the final steps. Poirot descended the grand staircase at 7:45 a.m., immaculate in a dove-gray morning suit, spats the color of fresh cream. George followed with a small valise and the leather folio now thick with statements. In the entrance hall, Inspector Japp waited with 2 constables and a black Maria parked discreetly behind the laurels. Japp's bowler was in his hand. His mustache drooped with fatigue. "Paperwork's done, Poirot. Pettigrew's charged with both murders, magistrate at 10, Bournemouth jail by noon." Poirot nodded. "Bon. But first, justice must be seen to be served. The household deserves closure." At 8 a.m., the remaining guests assembled in the long gallery, now stripped bare, Ming crates sealed and labeled for the National Trust. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, laying golden bars across the parquet. Captain Trevelyan stood by the fireplace, sober for once, eyes red-rimmed. Mrs. Blackwood sat ramrod straight in a high-backed chair, black lace replaced by mourning gray. Dr. Underwood hovered near the door, spectacles polished to a fare thee well. Mr. de Vere paced, notebook forgotten. Miss Chloe Haverford, 19, suddenly ancient, clutched a cup of tea with both hands. Grimshaw's deputy, a young footman named Perkins, served coffee with trembling solemnity. Poirot entered last, carrying a small cedar box. He placed it on the baize card table, now cleared of evidence, draped in green velvet. "Ladies and gentlemen, the case is closed. But before we part, Hercule Poirot wishes to return what was taken, and to honor what cannot be returned." He opened the box. Inside, on black velvet, the emerald necklace, clasp repaired. Diana's wristwatch, crystal replaced, hand set to 8 The pearl earring, reunited with its mate found yesterday in the cliff grass. A single white rose, dew fresh. He began with the necklace. 4,000 pounds of Colombian stones, snapped, planted, recovered. It belongs now to the National Trust with the house. But for 1 hour it returns to its mistress. He crossed to the portrait above the mantel. Diana at 21, flame hair, storm-gray eyes. He fastened the necklace at the painted throat. The emeralds caught the sun like green fire. Thus she wore it on the night she died. Thus she is remembered. He turned to Chloe. "The earrings. One planted to deceive, one lost in innocence. They are yours, by right and by Diana's will." He placed them in her palm. Chloe's tears fell onto the pearls. "She said I could borrow them for my wedding. I never thought—" Poirot patted her hand. "Wear them when you are happy, mademoiselle. That is revenge enough." To Dr. Underwood he gave the watch. Diana's heartbeat stopped at 10:51. Now it ticks again. "Keep it as a reminder. Time is the one thing we cannot mend." Underwood wound it gently. The tick filled the room, steady, merciless. To Mrs. Blackwood he offered the white rose. "For your brother's memory. The Ming is gone, but the garden remains. Plant it where the marble balcony meets the cliff. Let beauty grow from blood." Mrs. Blackwood took the rose without a word. Her cane tapped once as she left for the terrace. To Captain Trevelyan he returned the sea boots, cleaned, polished. "Your midnight swim saved your life, mon capitaine. Had you been in your room, the boots would not have been borrowed. You would have been framed or silenced." Trevelyan managed a crooked smile. "Damned cold swim, worth it, I suppose." To Mr. de Vere he handed a Sotheby's catalogue. "The Ming sale is cancelled. The trust will keep the collection intact. Your commission is lost, but your reputation is intact. A fair exchange." De Vere bowed, sleek as ever. Art endures, monsieur. So do I. At 8:30, Poirot addressed the staff in the servants' hall. Perkins, the maids, the cook, faces pale with shock. Mr. Hargreaves served this house for 32 years. His funeral will be at St. Mary's, Bournemouth, Wednesday next. The trust will pay. Miss Diana's will provides a pension for every servant who wishes to stay. Those who do not, references and a month's wage. A maid sobbed. Poirot placed a hand on her shoulder. Courage, petite. The house will live again. At 8:45, Sylvia Pettigrew was brought down the back stairs, hands cuffed, hair unbound, face bare of the prim mask. She wore the same brown dress she had worn at dinner 36 hours earlier. Poirot met her in the pantry. Jap waited outside. One question, mademoiselle. The birth certificate, why keep it? She laughed, a dry sound. It was all I had of him. Father gave it to mother the day I was born. Proof, he said. Proof I was nothing. Poirot's voice was gentle. You were everything to your mother, and to Diana once. She rewrote the will the day after she found the certificate in your Bible. She was going to acknowledge you publicly, legally. The sale was to fund a trust in both your names. Pettigrew's knees buckled. No, she hated me. Poirot shook his head. She pitied you. Pity is harder to bear than hate. He stepped aside. Jap took her arm. As she passed, she whispered, Tell the Rose. Tell it I'm sorry. Poirot inclined his head. The Rose already knows. At 9, the Black Maria crunched down the gravel. Pettigrew did not look back. The gates closed. White Gables fell silent. At 9:15, Poirot stood alone on the marble balcony. The sun was warm now. Gulls wheeled overhead. He opened Diana's will, delivered by solicitor at dawn. To Hercule Poirot, for services beyond duty, the Italian stiletto cleaned and mounted. May it remind him that even the sharpest blade can be turned to beauty. A small smile touched his lips. He looked over the balustrade. 80 feet below, the sea was turquoise, innocent. He placed the stiletto, now sheathed in silver, against the rail. Sunlight flashed along the blade. Adieu, mademoiselle. Your house is safe, your sister is free, and your story ends here. At 9:30, the Daimler purred to life. George loaded the valise. Poirot paused at the front door. Perkins, the footman, stood at attention. Will you stay, monsieur? Poirot considered. Non, mon ami. White Gables belongs to the nation now, and Hercule Poirot belongs to the next impossible crime. He tipped his Homburg. But I will return for the Rose. The car rolled down the drive. In the rearview mirror, White Gables shrank to a white speck against the cliff. Poirot opened his folio. On the front page, in Diana's handwriting, Thank you for seeing what I could not. The balcony is clean. The heart is not. At 10 Sauk, the National Trust flag rose above the gables for the first time. At 10:05, Mrs. Blackwood planted the white rose at the balcony's edge. At 10:10, Chloe fastened the pearls and smiled at her reflection. 19 again. At 10:15, Dr. Underwood wound the watch and listened to the tick. At 10:20, Captain Trevelyan poured coffee, black, no sugar. At 10:25, Mr. de Vere boarded the Bournemouth train, reputation intact. At 10:30, the house opened to the public, first visitors, a school party from Poole. Children's laughter echoed in the long gallery. At 11, Poirot's Daimler reached Bournemouth station. He purchased a platform ticket, though his train was not until noon. He stood on the footbridge watching gulls wheel over the pier. George approached. Telegram, sir, from London. Poirot opened it. Poirot twirled his mustache. Another locked room, mon ami. The little gray cells are never unemployed. He folded the telegram, placed it in his waistcoat. The train whistle sounded. He boarded. At 11:15, the Bournemouth Waterloo Express pulled out. Poirot took his seat, opened the Times. Page 7. White Gables murder. Governess charged. Belgian detective solves impossible crime. He smiled, turned to the crossword. Across, 7 letters. Justice. He filled it in. SERVED. Down, 6 letters. Memory. ROSE. The train gathered speed. The cliffs fell behind. The sea glittered. And somewhere on a marble balcony, a white rose opened its first petal to the sun. Train whistle fades. Gulls. Soft tick of Diana's watch. And there we close. Chapter 7, dear listener. Justice is served, quietly, finally, in the light of a new day. Next week, an epilogue from Baker Street and a final word from Preston. If the ending moved you, comment below. What will you remember, the rose, the watch, or the heart? This is Preston Flint, signing off from Poirot Stories. Good morning. The cliff is quiet. The story is complete. Chapter 8. Epilogue. At the cliff's edge, Poirot arrived at 5:42 p.m. in the cream-colored Daimler, George at the wheel. The gravel drive had been raked smooth. A discreet brass plaque beside the door read, White Gables, a property of the National Trust. Open daily, 10:05. A queue of visitors snaked past the Ming Gallery, now restored, porcelain gleaming under soft electric bulbs. Poirot slipped past with a nod to the warden, a former sergeant who saluted instinctively. He carried a small leather case and a single white rose wrapped in tissue. At 5:50 he stood on the marble balcony. The sun hung low, a copper coin balanced on the horizon. The sea was glass. The balustrade, once smeared with lipstick and blood, now bore a bronze plaque, in memory of Diana Haverford, 1899 to 1927. She loved this view. Beneath it, a riot of white roses climbed a new trellis. Mrs. Blackwood's planting had taken root. Poirot knelt, touched a petal. Still blooming, mademoiselle. Your revenge was kinder than your sister's. At 6:00, the last visitors departed. The warden locked the great oak doors. Poirot remained alone with the house. He opened the leather case. Inside, the Italian stiletto mounted in a velvet-lined frame, blade polished to a mirror. Diana's bequest. He hung it on the wall beside the French windows, exactly where the display had once held 6 daggers. A new label in his own neat hand. The blade that failed, HP. He stepped back. The stiletto caught the sunset like a drop of frozen blood. Thus beauty is made from tragedy, he murmured. At 6:10, a motor car crunched up the drive, buttercup yellow, familiar. Miss Chloe Haverford stepped out, 20 now, hair longer, pearls at her throat. She wore a Cambridge undergraduate's gown over a flapper dress, an odd but charming compromise. Mr. Poirot, the warden said you were here. I've come for the vacation. Reading party, you know. She gestured to a stack of books in the back seat. Virginia Woolf, Euclid, a battered Christie. Poirot smiled. And the lipstick? Chloe laughed. Coral only. Diana's condition holds. She joined him on the balcony. Look, they've named the rose after her. Rosa, Diana's memory. Hybrid tea, disease-resistant, perpetual bloom. She inhaled the scent. Smells like forgiveness. At 6:20, Dr. Felix Underwood arrived on a Raleigh bicycle, panniers bulging with medical journals. He had taken a post at the new Veterans Clinic in Bournemouth, funded by the Ming sale. His spectacles were the same, but his eyes were clearer. Monsieur Poirot? I keep the watch wound. It loses 3 minutes a day, exactly like the grandfather clock. I've grown fond of the lie. He produced Diana's Cartier. The tick was steady. Poirot nodded. Time is a kindly deceiver, doctor. It lets us believe the wound closes. At 6:30, Captain Trevelyan roared up in a Bentley, salt in his hair, a crate of claret in the dickey seat. He had bought a yacht with his inheritance. Diana had quietly forgiven his debts in the will. Poirot, old chap. Fancy a sail? Channel's calm as a mill pond. He clapped the detective on the shoulder. Still can't abide cliffs, eh? Poirot twirled his mustache. I prefer my impossibilities on dry land, mon capitaine. At 6:40, Mr. Roland de Vere arrived in a taxi from the station, sleek as ever, carrying a rolled canvas. The Trust commissioned a portrait, Diana at 21, but with the necklace. I painted it from memory, unveiling next spring. He unrolled the canvas. The painted Diana smiled. Storm gray eyes, emerald silk. The balcony behind her bathed in moonlight. Poirot studied it. You have captured the soul, monsieur, and the shadow. At 6:50, Mrs. Lavinia Blackwood appeared from the garden path, cane replaced by a walking stick of polished yew. She carried a small posy of white roses. I come every Friday, she said simply. To water the trellis. Reginald would approve. She placed the posy at the plaque. Poirot bowed. Family, madam, is what we choose to remember. At 7, the warden rang the bell for closing. The little group gathered on the balcony, 5 survivors and 1 detective. The sun touched the sea. Poirot raised a glass of sirop de cassis. Grimshaw's deputy had found a bottle in the cellar. To Diana Haverford, to Albert Hargreaves, to Sylvia Pettigrew, may she find peace in her cage, and to White Gables, may it never again keep secrets. They drank. The gulls wheeled overhead. A child's laugh drifted from the lawn, echoes of a future untainted. At 7:10, Chloe read from the new guidebook. The Marble Balcony Murder, solved by Hercule Poirot, 1927. Visitors are asked to respect the roses. She closed the book. They've made it a love story. Half-sisters, betrayal, redemption. Poirot smiled. The public prefers romance to rage. Let them have it. At 7:20, the Daimler's headlamps flickered on. George loaded the leather case, now containing the portrait rolled carefully. Poirot paused at the French doors. He looked back once. The stiletto glinted. The roses nodded. The sea sighed. Adieu, mes amis. The cliff has kept its promise. The house is healed. At 7:30, the cars departed. Bentley, Bugatti, taxi, bicycle, Daimler. The gravel settled. The National Trust flag caught the last light. White Gables stood alone with its ghosts, quiet, forgiven, open to the sky. At 8 on, Poirot's train pulled into Bournemouth. He opened the Times. Page 9. Pettigrew trial set for November. Plea of insanity expected. He folded the paper. Justice would grind its slow mill. He opened his Tailum folio. Inside, a pressed white petal and a note in Chloe's handwriting. The rose bloomed again today. Thank you for the light. C.H. At 8:15, the express steamed north. Poirot watched the cliffs fade to a white line. He spoke to the window. You arranged it all, mademoiselle, the will, the trust, the roses. Even in death you kept the house alive and your sister imprisoned but no longer invisible. He closed his eyes. The train rocked gently. Somewhere a watch ticked 3 minutes fast. At 9 the train passed through the New Forest. Moonlight silvered the ponies. Poirot dreamed, not of blood, but of white roses climbing a marble balustrade toward a sky without shadows. At 10 London lights appeared. Poirot woke. George handed him a telegram. Cairo, tomb curse, impossible death, come at once. Lady Carnarvon. Poirot twirled his mustache. Another balcony, perhaps, or a sarcophagus. The little gray cells are never at rest. The train pulled into Waterloo at 11:07. Poirot stepped onto the platform. A porter saluted. Taxi, sir? Poirot smiled. Non, Hercule Poirot walks tonight. The air is kind. He vanished into the fog. Homburg tilted, rose petal in his buttonhole. And somewhere, on a cliff in Dorset, a white rose opened its heart to the moon. Train whistle fades. Roses rustle. soft tick of a watch 3 minutes fast. And there we close Chapter 8, dear listener. The epilogue is complete. The cliff has spoken its last. Next week, Poirot returns to Baker Street, and a final word from Preston. If the roses moved you, plant one in your own garden. Comment below. Which character will you carry with you? This is Preston Flint signing off from Poirot Stories. Good night. The balcony is clean. The story blooms. Chapter 9. The Return to Baker Street. Poirot arrived at 7:42 a.m., valise in George's hand, Homburg tilted against the fog. Mrs. Hudson met him at the door with the reverence due a returning hero. "Welcome home, Mr. Poirot. Kettle's on. Captain Hastings arrived an hour ago, said he'd walk from Waterloo rather than miss you." Poirot smiled. "Mon ami, Hastings would walk from Patagonia for seed cake." He climbed the 17 steps, counted, as always, with the neatness of a cat. The door stood ajar. Inside, the room was exactly as he had left it 6 months earlier. Green-shaded lamp, Tantalus on the sideboard, the bust of Napoleon gazing sternly from the mantel. Only the fire was new, Mrs. Hudson's doing, and the smell of Darjeeling. Hastings rose from the armchair, taller than memory, sunburned from South American sun. "Poirot, you old rascal, you look as if you've been holidaying in Biarritz, not solving murders on cliffs." He pumped Poirot's hand with the enthusiasm of a Labrador. Poirot winced theatrically. "My friend, your grip is still that of a gaucho. Sit, sit. We have much to discuss, and Mrs. Hudson's cake will not eat itself." At 7:50 they settled by the fire. Hastings poured tea, 2 sugars for himself, none for Poirot. George unpacked the leather case, the mounted stiletto, the rolled portrait of Diana, the pressed white rose petal. Hastings whistled. "Jumping Jehoshaphat, a locked balcony, a governess killer, and a dagger in a frame?" "You've been busy." Poirot twirled his mustache. "Busy, oui. But order and method, Hastings. Always order and method." At 8 on, Hastings produced a battered notebook, pages curled from pampas dust. "I've followed the case in the Argentine papers. They called it the Marble Balcony Mystery. Said you used fishing line and a ghost. Explain, old chap. From the beginning." Poirot leaned back, eyes half closed, voice soft as the fire's crackle. He began with the telegram. "Urgent. Family matter, come at once. D.H." He described White Gables, the cliff, the Ming, the 6 suspects like chess pieces on a moonlit board. He lingered on the balcony. "Carrara marble, Hastings, cold as a tomb, 80 feet to the rocks. A door locked from within, yet the key on the balcony side when the captain entered. Impossible? Non. Merely a matter of fishing line, curtain rings, and a sister's rage." At 8:15 he recounted the footprints. Size 10 rubber soles, weighted boots dragged on phosphorescent line from the music room above. The glow, Miss Chloe saw it from her bedroom. She thought it a spirit, I thought it evidence. Hastings chuckled. "You and your little gray cells. What about the lipstick?" "Rouge Baser, discontinued. Stolen from Chloe's compact, smeared on the balustrade to implicate youth. The blonde hair, wig from the attic. The necklace, snapped, planted on the aunt. Every clue a lie except the ones the murderer forgot." At 8:30, Poirot described the wax cylinder. Diana's voice spliced from a garden party. "I'll be on the balcony at 10:30. Played on a gramophone with a kitchen timer jammed by a sixpence. The sixpence slipped, evidence of panic. Hastings leaned forward. "And the butler?" "2 butlers, mon ami. The real, Hargreaves, drugged, hanged. The false, Pettigrew in livery. She learned the bowline from her father's books. Blood called to blood." At 8:45, Poirot unrolled the portrait. Diana at 21, painted by De Vere from memory. The trust will hang it in the long gallery. The necklace repaired, will rest at her painted throat. Hastings studied the storm-gray eyes. She was beautiful, and dangerous. She rewrote her will the day she found the birth certificate. She was going to acknowledge Sylvia publicly, legally. The sale was to fund a trust for both. Sylvia killed the sister who would have saved her. At 9 on, Mrs. Hudson brought fresh scones. Poirot buttered his with precision. Hastings refilled the teapot. Now the chimney, Poirot. The Argentine papers said you suspected a chimney. Poirot's eyes twinkled. A red herring, Hastings. I considered the music room chimney wide, soot-black. But the fishing line was simpler. Criminals repeat what works. Detectives repeat what they read. I once solved a Bruges burglary via a baker's oven. The principle is the same. At 9:15, Hastings produced a telegram. From Chloe Haverford, Cambridge. Rose bloomed again. Watch keeps perfect time. Thank you for the light. Poirot smiled. The young heal quickly. Dr. Underwood's clinic thrives. Captain Trevelyan sails the channel. Mrs. Blackwood tends the roses every Friday. Mr. de Vere's portrait will be unveiled in spring. Justice, served in petals and paint. At 9:30, Poirot opened the stiletto's frame. The blade glinted. Diana's bequest. May it remind him that even the sharpest blade can be turned to beauty. I hung it on the balcony wall. The trust kept it. A dagger becomes a relic. Hastings laughed. You'll have to start a museum. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Non, mon ami, one dagger is enough. The rest I keep here. He tapped his temple. At 9:45, the postman knocked. A thick envelope, official Bournemouth crest. Poirot slid it with the stiletto's miniature twin. Inside, the trial date, Sylvia Pettigrew, 14th of November, Old Bailey. Plea. Not guilty by reason of insanity. A second sheet. A single white rose petal pressed between glass. A note in Warden's hand. The trellis blooms year-round. Visitors leave flowers. The children call it Diana's garden. Poirot placed the petal beside Chloe's. Memory, Hastings. The kindest justice. At 10 Hastings stood. Another case, Poirot? The Orient Express trunk? Poirot waved a hand. Tomorrow, mon ami. Today we finish the cake. He cut a second slice, offered it. Hastings took it with a grin. To locked rooms and fishing line. To white roses and little gray cells. At 10:15, the fire settled into embers. Poirot opened the Times crossword. Across 9 letters. Resolution. He filled it. JUSTICED. Down 7 letters. Epilogue. CLOSURE. At 10:30, Hastings departed for his club. Poirot stood at the window. Fog lifted. Sunlight touched the area railings. He spoke to the empty room. You arranged it all, mademoiselle. The house, the roses, the light. Even in death you kept your sister alive. And Hercule Poirot keeps his promises. He placed the 2 rose petals in a small silver frame beside Napoleon's bust. The stiletto's reflection glinted in the glass. At 11, Mrs. Hudson cleared the tea things. Poirot retired to his room. On the bedside table, a new telegram. Cairo, tomb curse, impossible death, come at once. Lady Carnarvon. He smiled, folded it into his waistcoat. George entered with pressed shirts. Train to Southampton, sir. The Carnarvon Queen sails Wednesday. Poirot twirled his mustache. Pack the tropical suits, George, and the fishing line. One never knows. At 11:15, Poirot stood on the step of 221B. A boy delivered the evening paper. Front page. White Gables opens to record crowds. Roses in perpetual bloom. He tucked it under his arm. The fog had burned off entirely. London sparkled. He raised his Homburg to the sky. Adieu, White Gables. Your story is told. Your cliff is quiet. He turned inside. The door closed with a soft click. and somewhere in a Dorset garden a white rose opened its heart to the September sun. Fire crackles, kettle sings, soft tick of a perfect clock. And there we close Chapter 9, dear listener. Poirot is home, the balcony is clean, the story rests. Next week, a final word from Preston and the promise of the Nile. If Baker Street warmed you, comment below. Will you miss the cliff or follow Poirot to Egypt? This is Preston Flint, signing off from Poirot Stories. Good morning. The little gray cells are already packing. Chapter 10, a final word from Preston. It is Friday, 23rd of September 1927. Exactly 1 week since Poirot hung the stiletto on the balcony wall and boarded the train for Cairo. The house is quiet now. The National Trust flag hangs limp in the still air. The roses have dropped their final petals of the season. And I, Preston Flint, your faithful narrator, have come back to the cliff's edge with a thermos of cocoa, a blanket, and one last story to tell. Soft clink of thermos lid, rustle of wool. Sit with me. I arrived at 6:42 p.m., the exact minute Poirot's Daimler first crunched the gravel 3 months ago. The warden recognized me from the recordings. "Mr. Flint, the balcony's yours till sunset. Mind the roses, they're particular about strangers." He handed me a brass key on a green ribbon. "Lock up when you leave. The house trusts you." I bowed. White Gables has a way of making you feel chosen. At 6:50 I stood where Diana fell. The marble is warm from the day's sun. The bronze plaque gleams. In memory of Diana Haverford, 1899–1927. She loved this view. Beneath it, the trellis is bare now, but the soil is rich with promise. I placed my thermos on the balustrade, exactly where the lipstick smear once glowed, and opened my notebook. 10 chapters. 13,847 words. 95 minutes of your life, and every second, I hope, has felt like stepping back into 1927 with Poirot's little gray cells humming beside you. At 7 on, the gramophone in the long gallery began to play. Someone left it winding down. The needle scratched through the run-out groove, then caught on the old tune. "Yes, we have no bananas." I smiled. The house remembers. I let it play. The music drifted across the lawn where school children had picnicked at noon, where Chloe Haverford will read Euclid beneath the yew tree next summer, where Mrs. Blackwood will plant a new rose every Friday until her cane no longer serves. The song faded. Silence returned, soft as velvet. At 7:10, I walked the balcony's length, 20 feet of Carrara veined like clouds. I traced the circular scratch with my finger, 3 millimeters concentric, the ghost of a curtain ring. I looked up at the music room window, 28 feet above. The scorch mark on the sill has been painted over, but I know it's there. I looked down at the drain, brass grill polished bright. The fishhook is gone, but the screwhead still bears a tiny nick. Every scar is a sentence in the story we told together. I whispered to the marble, "You kept your secrets well." But Poirot was kinder than time. At 7:20, the sun touched the horizon. I opened the thermos. Cocoa, Belgian 2 sugars, a dash of vanilla. Poirot's recipe. I poured a cup, raised it to the portrait inside the French doors. Diana at 21, emeralds at her throat, storm-gray eyes smiling at a future she would never live. To you, mademoiselle. To Sylvia, may the bars be kinder than the cliff. To Hargreaves, may the sea forgive. To the house, may you never lock another door in anger. I drank. The cocoa was perfect. At 7:30, I sat on the balustrade, careful of the roses, and opened my notebook to the final page. I had prepared a letter. Not for you, listener. For them. I read it aloud to the sunset. My dear White Gables, you were built on smuggling and porcelain, on love and betrayal, on a cliff that refuses to crumble. You have seen a mistress fall, a sister rise, a butler swing, a detective twirl his mustache and walk away. You have been scrubbed of blood, painted with light, open to the innocent. Your roses bloom where tears once fell. Your stiletto hangs as art, not weapon. Your story is told, 10 chapters, 95 minutes, 13,847 words. But stories do not end, they echo. So echo this. Every visitor who stands on your balcony will feel the wind that carried Diana's last breath. Every child who laughs in your gallery will chase the ghost of Chloe's Charleston. Every rose that opens will carry Mrs. Blackwood's Friday promise. Every tick of Dr. Underwood's watch will remind the world that time can be mended. Every sail Captain Trevelyan sets will carry the salt of forgiveness. Every portrait Mr. de Vere unveils will smile with Diana's storm-gray eyes. And every listener who hears this tale, on a night bus in Sydney, beneath a blanket in Manchester, on a train from Edinburgh to Glasgow, will carry a white petal in their heart. Thank you for letting me tell your story. The cliff is quiet. The house is healed. The cocoa is drunk. Yours in order and method, Preston Flint. I folded the letter, slipped it beneath the plaque beside a fresh white rose left by a child that afternoon. The paper will yellow. The rose will fade, but the words will stay. At 7:45, the sun slipped below the sea. The sky turned rose gold, then indigo. Stars pricked out, one by one. I gathered my blanket, my thermos, my notebook. I locked the French doors with the brass key. Click. The sound echoed exactly as Grimshaw heard it on 17th of June, 10:38 p.m. History in a key. At 7:50, I walked the gravel drive for the last time. The warden waited by the gate. "Will you be back, Mr. Flint?" I smiled. "Every Friday to water the roses." He handed me a small packet. From the gift shop, seed packet, Rosa Diana's memory. Hybrid tea, perpetual bloom. I tucked it into my coat. Perfect. At 8 a.m., the gates closed behind me. I stood on the cliff path. The house was dark now, save for a single light in the long gallery, the stiletto catching the moon. I opened my notebook to a fresh page. I wrote, Chapter 11 begins where Chapter 10 ends. Not on a balcony, but in a garden. Not with blood, but with petals. Not with a locked door, but with an open gate. The story is yours now, listener. Plant the rose. Tell the tale. Keep the cocoa hot. And when the wind rises off the channel, listen. White Gables is speaking. I closed the notebook. The wind carried the scent of salt and roses. I walked into the night. At 8:15, I reached the village inn. The landlord poured a pint without asking. "To the balcony," he said. "To the roses," I replied. We drank. Outside, the church bell tolled 8. Somewhere, a watch ticked 3 minutes fast. At 9 soon, I boarded the Bournemouth train. I opened my laptop. Yes, listener, even in 1927, I carried the future in my pocket. I typed the final lines of our script. Word count, 2,000 exactly. Runtime, 13 minutes at 150 WPM. I saved the file. Blood on the marble balcony final.mp3. I pressed upload. The progress bar filled, slowly, deliberately, like Poirot arranging clues on a baize table. At 9:30, the train pulled into Bournemouth. I stepped onto the platform. A boy sold evening papers. Front page. White Gables breaks visitor record. Roses in bloom year-round. I bought one. Inside, a small advert. Poirot Stories, new episode every Friday. Subscribe now, I smiled. The story lives. At 10 I walked the pier. The sea was black glass. I opened the seed packet. I scattered the seeds into the wind. They vanished, tiny promises. Somewhere they will land. Somewhere they will grow. Somewhere a child will ask, "Why is this rose called Diana?" And a parent will begin, Once upon a time on a marble balcony. At 10:30 I boarded the night train to London. I took my seat. The whistle blew. The cliffs fell behind. I opened my notebook one last time. I wrote, "To every listener who stayed until the end, thank you. You are the epilogue. You are the rose. You are the light on the balcony when the house is dark. Keep the story blooming. Keep the cocoa hot. And when you stand on any cliff anywhere, remember, the impossible is merely the truth in disguise." This is Preston Flint, signing off from White Gables, from Baker Street, from the edge of the world. Good night. The balcony is clean. The story is yours. I closed the book. The train rocked gently. Outside, the stars wheeled. Somewhere, Poirot was boarding a steamer to Cairo, fishing line in his valise. Somewhere, Chloe was reading Euclid beneath a yew tree. Somewhere, a white rose opened its heart to the moon. And here, listener, our tale ends. Not with a locked door, not with blood, but with a key on a green ribbon, a thermos of cocoa, and 10 chapters that will bloom forever. Train whistle fades. Roses rustle. Soft tick of a watch 3 minutes fast. Gramophone needle lifts. Silence.